Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Road Trip Flip. I'm Marvin, your host. Thanks for stopping by. In this episode, I'm traveling to the state of Washington to pick up a motorcycle I wasn't planning on bringing home. It wasn't exactly my first choice, as the bikes I had initially been looking at were all Japanese sport bikes from the 90s and older. Of the four bikes, this bike was actually my dead last choice. You'll learn why in a moment. The top three bikes were a Kawasaki KZ900, a Suzuki GS850, and a 1999 Kawasaki ZRX 1100. All three were clean, complete runners, and all were priced right. Aside from the bikes, my main reason for going up to Washington was to see three old Navy buddies, Ross, Doug, and Danny. No, they didn't all live in the same place. Ross and I served at our first two duty stations together, first on Guam, flying the H-46 Sea Knight, and then in Lemoore, California, flying H-1 Hueys and the venerable C-12 King Air. We have so many stories of flying together, as well as some off-duty shenanigans. Of course, the tales seem to have grown taller over the years and are only really entertaining to us, but all are great sea stories nonetheless. What's a sea story, you might ask? Well, you might already know this, but in comparison, a fairy tale starts with once upon a time, and a good Navy sea story starts with this is no shit. Day one. As soon as I arrived in Seattle, my buddy and master storyteller Ross was there to pick me up. We didn't waste any time catching up on bike news and stories, as he's a fellow bike enthusiast just like me. We also headed straight to the first bike and only bike that I would check out, my last choice. It turned out the KZ900 was waiting for carburetor rebuild parts since it wasn't running that well. The GS850 also needed its carbs rebuilt. Same problem as the KZ, likely because it was sitting. And the green Eddie Lawson replica, the ZRX 1100, the owner never returned any of my messages. So the only bike left was, drum roll please, a 1997 Harley Davidson XLH883 Sportster. Yep, a Sportster. Why? This one was set up as a scrambler. All that was missing was dual sport tires, a chain drive, and a skid plate. The street tires on it were brand new, so if I had to road trip at home, at least those were good for use on the asphalt. The owner, Tyler, was responsive and helpful in describing the bike over the phone. While I do have a long history with Harley, I've never owned a Sportster before. I thought it would be a fun highway-capable bike for eventual light off-roading on easy trails. It is, after all, a Harley, still heavy for a small bike, and not really intended for off-roading. But do I care? Nope. After discussing the bike's history with Tyler, going over the extra accessories and a test ride, I came back to negotiate a price and a handshake. My test ride left me with my ears ringing, as the bike had straight, unbaffled exhaust pipes. I think Tyler's neighbors were happy to hear the bike leave for the last time as I headed to Ross's house. I was relieved I didn't have to spend the next day checking out bikes. As it was, I had no other options anyway. Now I could spend some quality time with Ross before I moved on 2 days later. Day 2 and 3. Ross and I went to a couple motorcycle parts stores to pick up tools, saddlebags, rain gear, and a gas bottle. The bike had a small tank and no gas gauge, so the gas can was added insurance. Driving around Seattle was nice, as I reminisced of when I lived in Snohomish and Yakima for 2 years as a kid. It wasn't raining at all during this visit, so I considered myself lucky. My last visit to Seattle, Ross fired up his guitar amp in the guest room where I was staying. He's an accomplished musician, and his guest room reflected this. He also had a keyboard and a drum kit. I played drums in a garage band 35 years prior, so Ross suggested an impromptu jam session. We played The Ocean by Led Zeppelin, and while it wasn't perfect, it was a blast. We didn't rock the neighborhood this time, though. The next day, we took the bikes out for a spin on a short local ride. We found soul-warming bowls of ramen on the West Seattle waterfront, with the Space Needle off in the distance. It was a great day for hang time with Ross, as it's been a while since we rode bikes together. I finished off the day configuring the bike for travel by mounting saddlebags, a tank bag, and a backrest. Day 4. I was determined to be on the road before noon. Ross agreed to join me on my trip up to Oak Harbor to see Doug. It was a day trip for him, but I planned to couch surf at Doug's place for the next 2 days. Seattle in the summer is beautiful. Our ride to the Mukilteo ferry was breathtaking, as was the ferry ride itself. In fact, the whole ride to Doug's on an island in the Puget Sound had me being such a tourist in neck-snapping awe of everything I saw. It was so green and lush. The roads were smooth, with no traffic to bother us. I let Ross lead the way so he didn't have to listen to my obnoxious straight pipes. Plus, his BMW adventure bike had a better navigation system than my 27-year-old Harley. I didn't have one. It was fun to be his wingman, like 2 kids on Schwinn Stingrays playing Follow the Leader. All that was missing was a bicycle bell and the ace of spades clipped to our frame with a clothespin, making noise on our spokes, and my sister yelling, "Who took all the aces out of the deck of cards? Marvin!" Fast forward 50 years, and it's still apparent neither of us has grown up. We arrived at Doug's acreage before 2 and had time to sit and catch up in his shop. He lives on a large plot of land with pine trees everywhere. His modest ranch-style home is of 1950s vintage and quaintly decorated with a nautical theme. He lives there solo with his 2 dogs, Carl and Cody. He has enough room on the property to rent out space to 2 active-duty Navy types, one in an RV, the other in a mobile home. It was a good business move to supplement his retirement from the Navy. As a senior enlisted man, Doug was one of the crew chiefs in the H-3 helicopter I flew in the reserves. Being the crusty old sailor and aviator that he was, Doug was a wealth of knowledge. I always enjoyed flying with him, as we trusted one another in the aircraft, with me up front and Doug running the show aft. He's a salty old dog, and despite his gruff, sarcastic demeanor, he had a soft heart for his pilots. Well, at least some of them. We stayed in touch for many years after we both retired from the uniform. He became a close friend. I was sad the day he called me to ask for my help in selling his house. When he made that call, he had already purchased the Oak Harbor house during what was supposed to be a short motorcycle ride from SoCal up to Washington. He was going to visit a friend who was also prior Navy, now a realtor. In fact, on that same trip, he bought 2 houses. The call went something like this. "Marv, I'm up in Washington near Whidbey Island. I bought 2 houses. You gotta help me sell my house in San Diego." "Wait, what?" I replied. And just like that, we listed his house after he returned from Washington, sold it, and he was once again northbound to his new home. The rest is history. Day 5 and 6. Doug gave me a tour of the property and the Navy base nearby for some grocery shopping. The base was plain, but it did have some $1 million waterfront property. We hiked the coastline for a while to exercise the dogs. I met the next-door neighbor, Dennis, at their RV site. They had just purchased the land and were waiting to break ground on their new house. They still owned a house in town that was in escrow being sold. We did go to Dennis's house, as he is a metalsmith by trade. My bike had longer than stock shocks on the back, so he welded on an extension to my kickstand so it wouldn't lean over so far when parked. Before the extension, it was almost like I had to pick the bike up off its side. It was so leaned over. Not anymore. We rode around town afterward. Oak Harbor was visually more of the same. Green trees, views of Puget Sound everywhere, and all of the houses nestled in rolling greenery made me wonder if I could live there. I was wearing a San Diego Surf Shop t-shirt. It was a reminder. Of course I couldn't live there. There's no surf nearby. If there was, it was 4 hours west to open ocean. It would be frigid cold and sharky. I could hear Arnold in my head, however. I'll be back. I'd love to return to see my old pal Doug every once in a while. We rode out to Cedro Woolley for a barbecue dinner that afternoon and lumbered through scenic farm country on the way home. Day 7. 2 days at Doug's flew by all too quickly. We left after a lazy breakfast. Doug rode with me on his Beamer to Keystone Harbor. After a hug and trading see-you-laters, he would head home from there as I rolled onto a ferry. Port Townsend was my next stop on the Olympic Peninsula. I'd never been there, and once again the scenery was breathtaking. This was where I had my first regret. There were several beach towns west of my route on Highway 101. While I did see much of the ocean on this leg, I just can't get enough of seaside towns on the Pacific Ocean. Cue the Arnold soundbite once again. This leg was also my first time solo on the road. No wingman. I felt fine as my little Harley chugged along. It ran well as the imaginary odometer miles clicked away. Side note, my speedometer, odometer, and trip meter didn't work, so I had to kick a little old school and plan my gas stops. I have a new speed sensor, just haven't installed it yet. After doing the math, with a 40 mile per gallon burn rate, a 3.3 gallon tank, and a 1 gallon gas can in my saddlebag, I figured I could easily travel 120 miles without a pit stop. As it was, the bike's engine was solid mounted to the frame, so vibration of the handlebars and seat caused numbness in my hands and backside within 15 minutes of riding. It was brutal. I'm not planning on having any more kids, so this ride probably closed that door for me anyway. Vibration, coupled with a clutch lever that required 10,000 pounds of clamping force to pull it, made me tired after 30 minutes of riding. This time increased as the ride progressed, but by the end, I imagined I could crush a beer can with my left hand. I felt like a fiddler crab with a gigantic left claw. I eventually unloaded half a bottle of cable lube, but problem solved. By late afternoon, I made it to Camp Riley in Warrenton, an Oregon State Military Training Base, where I would stay the night. It's just south of the Oregon border and a few miles away from Astoria, where I would have dinner. I was on the coast, so salmon and clam chowder were on my stomach's radar. Astoria, by the way, is where the movie The Goonies was filmed. I was determined to be a typical tourist and find the Goonies house. It wasn't hard to find. As I rolled up, I recognized it right away. It was nicely kept, but it didn't look like it was occupied. After shooting some pictures and video, I made my way back to the base for the night. Day 8. I left rain-soaked Warrenton and made it to Independence, Oregon. After looking at the GoPro footage, it was another great day of riding. More than half of it was on back roads with no traffic. The long and windy, twisty roads were a joy to ride. Stops in Seaside and Cannon Beach surf spots were breathtaking, but Siri diverted me to a road east of Highway 101 for a 45-minute jaunt through some farm country north of Tillamook that made me want to stay. Onward to ice cream at the Tillamook Ice Cream Factory and homemade beef sticks with Debbie D. I had a pleasant chat with her for 20 minutes. She's my age, looking to retire from her 3 decades old small business that was for sale. I found a big wave surf spot south of Lincoln City and a fun longboard spot at Otter Rock before pulling into the most charming mile of gravel road leading to Danny and Renee's house. It was a great day. Day 9. After a great visit with Danny, Renee, and their daughter Kate in Independence, Oregon, I departed for Crescent City to see Mark and Carol Woodley. The ride to the California border was uneventful. so much that I didn't stop to take photos or video. I stopped in Bandon for a slice of pizza. Mark and Carol, they're like family. They spoke of someday leaving Northern California. I hope they move somewhere that I can visit them more often. But then, I just saw them last fall when I bought a red van in Washington. I'll be on these trips often enough, so wherever they end up, I can always deviate from my flight plan. From Crescent City, I met up with recently retired Mike, one of my best surf brothers from San Diego, who was on a road trip of his own to visit friends. The best part is, I gave him my board and wetsuit the day before I left San Diego, so we surfed Crescent City. It wasn't too cold, with a 5mm hooded wetsuit and booties. Now, I can say I surfed Northern California, which I'd never done before. Day 10. After breakfast at Eggheads in Fort Bragg, a visit to Glass Beach proved to be awesome. Blue glass was scarce, but brown, green, and clear glass comprised the bulk of the granular beauty. The ride out of Fort Bragg was spectacular. It also proved to be 90 miles of the twistiest coastal road I've ever ridden. Mike and I had barbecue for lunch in Gualala and parted ways just north of Bodega Bay, where Mike took in a quick surf. I had to get to Carmel, or so I thought. The ride was work, and I had to cut my itinerary short. I stopped because I was tired and sleepy in San Rafael. Carmel was still 2 hours away. I decided to stay the night in San Rafael and found another ramen place with food to warm the belly. Carmel is on the agenda for the next day, and Point Magoo by late afternoon after that. Day 11 and 12. It's almost over. The last two legs of my trip, San Rafael, Point Magoo, Chula Vista. San Rafael was actually the coolest little town that I'd never seen before. Steamer Lane, Santa Cruz, was on the way, so I had to see it, even though the surf was small. Same with Asilomar Beach in Carmel. I had lunch in Carmel with my old high school pal Terry and her good friend Dwight. Dwight is such the gentleman. He is the nicest fella. After lunch, I was lucky to have found a room online at Naval Air Station Point Magoo. It was the perfect stop before tackling LA and Orange County traffic. I hadn't realized that riding a motorcycle through both on a Sunday was the magic ticket. Traffic was minimal all morning. I'll remember that for my next two-wheeled trip. I made it to Camp Pendleton near San Clemente. The surf was tiny there too. It turns out I didn't miss out on a whole lot of surf, but truth be told, this was the best solo motorcycle trip ever. I wasn't jonesing for surf. I'll still plan to pick up a couple more camper vans down the road, but I'm glad I decided to pick up a bike for this adventure. Do me a favor, folks. Tell everyone you know about the flip, like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, and leave a comment down below, or send me an email. My email address is in the description. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you on the flip side.